with me. God, may the words of our lips be those you want spoken, and may the prayers of our heart be those you want heard. And may we live knowing that with you beside us, in front of us, and within us, we are capable of loving more boldly, more courageously than we ever could alone. Amen. There is a prayer attributed to Ireland's beloved patron saint, St. Patrick, in which Patrick, in the face of his own fears, calls upon his strongest, most effective shield to protect him and surround him. This prayer is most commonly called St. Patrick's breastplate, in reference to a piece of armor like a shield. The shield he describes in this prayer is not made of metal or wood or bronze, as we might often think of shields being made of, but rather the shield that St. Patrick calls on is an invisible one that is tied to the earth, one that is tied to God. This shield is made up of such elements as the radiance of the moon, the splendor of fire, the speed of lightning, the swiftness of wind, the depth of the sea, the stability of the earth, and the firmness of rock. The prayer goes on to then end with this image of one, a being who is encircled and drenched in this energy of Christ. Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left. So if you are a member of our Covenant choir, or you are blessed with a really good memory, maybe you're thinking to yourself right now, did our choir sing a version of this at some point? Yes, we did. In May, we sang a simple yet powerful musical setting of this very prayer. A couple months after that, this past July, this prayer then came sauntering back into my life as I was invited to sing this piece at the wedding of two good friends. As the groom talked with me about this prayer and the musical setting of it in preparation for his wedding, he told me that this was the prayer he wanted to hear in the biggest moments of his life journey. He wants to be reminded of that spiritual shield that surrounds and protects him. Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, beneath me, above me, on my right, and on my left. Now, I must admit that a term like spiritual shield, that's one I find myself a bit wary of. When I go back and I examine my own theological language, reading past sermons, past prayers, it is pretty clear that I almost see God as the anti-shield. God is the one who breaks through the barriers that separates us. God is the one that melts away the layers that keep us hidden or unseen. God is the one who encourages us to look at those vulnerable parts of ourselves, who challenges us to cross borders, make connections. So admittedly, for me, this equating God with a shield, that initially causes me to bristle a bit because it's not my native theological language. But nevertheless, the words of St. Patrick are the ones that have been arising in me time and time again as I considered this morning's gospel reading. Now, speaking of bristling, did anyone else cringe a bit with some of the lines from our reading this morning? The one that causes me to cringe when I first hear it goes something like this. Do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. In our reading this morning from the 12th chapter of Luke, we are given a glimpse of one of those moments where Jesus is most definitely feeling that human emotion of stress. He says it himself, "What stress am I under?" And he knows that he is on his final road. A cross is awaiting him. We hear the exhaustion in his voice. We feel the exhaustion in his voice. Perhaps we recognize that exhaustion from our own lives in some way. Perhaps remembering times that we have felt pulled beyond what we think we can endure. And in this story, we are reminded that Jesus has been there too. Today's story is one of those examples of how we get to journey alongside Jesus through these gospel stories in both his moments of steadiness, along with his moments of stress, of weariness. Much of today's story focuses our attention on the divisions that Jesus had come to bring to the earth. 3 against 2, 2 against 3, father against son, mother against daughter, the list goes on. And if you are like me, these words do not sound easy, maybe not immediately palatable, maybe confusing. Isn't this the same Jesus who just ages ago reminded us that a house divided against itself cannot stand? And so perhaps for us today, this passage invites us into some questions. What does it mean for Christ to be a divider? Are some divisions holy? These are questions with many answers, answers that are unique to each of us and to our own experience. We have likely experienced times when indeed a division of some sort felt necessary, maybe even freeing. Perhaps a relationship needed to end. A parting of ways between loved ones felt called for. A group that had been together knew that it needed to break in order to stay most authentic and true. And I wonder, are these the kinds of divisions Jesus is referring to here? What makes a division holy? What makes a division sacred? I've been sitting with those questions this week. Sometimes my own stress level reflecting that of Jesus in this particular moment. For these aren't easy questions, and they don't immediately fit into the theological framework that I've come to understand and exist within. But with these questions, my mind keeps wandering back to the words of St. Patrick and that holy shield. Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, beneath me, above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left. The holy energy that St. Patrick is calling upon here seems to me to be a sort of holy division, a holy energy that encircles us and suspends danger and damage, a holy energy that holds us, and within it, it allows us to flourish in our most authentic ways. Perhaps Christ, the divider, is that shield of courage, of spirit strength, a shield made of the radiance of moon, the splendor of fire, the depth of the sea that Patrick calls upon, and that radiates out from each of us. It is a shield that does indeed divide us in some sense of the word, for it provides a holy layer of courage and boldness that we might not find possible on our own. Christ, the divider, interrupts destructive patterns. Christ, the divider, changes the course of history. It creates moments of before and after. For it was Christ's arrival to earth that, after all, was a divider of sorts. A divider that invited so many to forever change their course. The arrival of Jesus and his ministry on earth was God's dramatic intervention into human history, a decisive, divisive moment that gave us a new way to be and to love. And so it is with that shield. It is a shield of Christ's energy that provides a holy division from that which might cause irreparable damage. Holy divisions are the ones that hold us in a protective love, that give us our full freedom and aliveness, that encircle us with a loving protection that allows us to flourish. It is the holy divisions that give us the courage to love more fiercely and act more justly, and they are the sacred circles that hold us as we move at our own pace, in our own rhythms, and in our own ways. This is something that I think is happening for all of us all the time. And yet I was reminded of this Christ energy, this protective love, very powerfully in my own life recently. Many of you know that the only wedding in my life was not the one I sang at the beginning of July, but my own wedding 3 weeks ago. And in preparing for my own wedding, I thought to myself, how am I going to enter this sacred day and not get overwhelmed by the aspects of stress or the pain that was present in my family or dynamics between people? How will I actually stay present to this sacred day in my life? And yet when I describe that day to people, almost the first thing I say is that there was a protective circle, being surrounded by a Christ energy the whole time, the painful, the damaging, seeming suspended in midair, and the ability to give and receive love to a full extent. Suddenly, St. Patrick's breastplate became a bit more real, began to fit into that theological framework and that native language that I had been speaking. And so as we hear about this idea of Christ the divider in our gospel reading today, there are many ways to hear that and to understand that. But I encourage you too to take those words of St. Patrick, that Christ is acting as a divider, to be sure, but also acting as a uniter, giving us strength to boldly act in love, knowing we are capable of survival beyond our wildest dreams, and asking ourselves when we come in the face of division, does this division allow me to be my freest, fullest self in the world? Is this division but one stop on a longer journey towards healing and peace? If so, then perhaps that is the shield of Christ's energy, a shield that holds us in protective love, a shield that gives us our full freedom and aliveness, and a shield that encircles us with a loving protection that allows us to flourish. I give great thanks for that shield around us all. Amen.
Amen.
Our next hymn is found in your hymnal, the black hymnal, number 412, God Moves in a Mysterious Way.